So let's talk about some of the strongest units of the Unforgiven right now, with an overview of 10 of the datasheets that are most played in competitive lists and what makes them so good and worth including. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking Unforgiven on the tabletop, and in this video we're focusing on Dark Angels datasheets. In current gameplay, it looks like the Dark Angels are sort of doing okay to maybe lower mid at the top end of competitive play. Tournament win rates are around about 46%, and at the moment kind of middling play rates at tournaments, around about 16th most represented out of the 27 factions, which if anything is maybe a little bit on the low side for them given their massive surge in popularity with their new kits last year, plus the Lions' recent return. It doesn't feel like they're one of the strongest standout factions of Warhammer 40k, but definitely have enough interesting stuff to compete well. For this video, I thought it could be interesting to take a look at some of the best choices for the Dark Angels in tournament lists right now, and just for a sort of rough temperature check of what sort of units tend to get included really quite a lot, I had a look at 15 competitive lists for the Sons of the Lion, all of which had done well in tournaments, mostly since the last balance update, and there were several datasheets that just tended to get played with a lot more frequency over the rest. In Space Marines there's a vast amount of unit options, so quite a lot of things see some slightly more niche play, though for the Dark Angels in particular I do feel like there's quite a few things that just aren't really used that much, the majority of their named characters falling into that category annoyingly. Attachments can certainly influence what units are taken in quite a big way. The ones doing well in tournaments tend to be the Gladius Task Force and Stormlance, maybe unfortunately still having the Codex attachments being more favoured versus their own unique bespoke ones. Out of those ones though, it looks like the Company of Hunters has had the most success for the Raven Wing, though it's still a fair bit more niche. Obviously detachment choice is going to favour which units are going to be better or worse in quite a big way. Maybe most obviously Gladius being a bit more balanced and skewed towards their infantry elites more than other things. Stormlance helping out those quite a bit, but maybe a bit more draw to running Raven Wing style units with the bite focused stratagems, and then certainly Company of Hunters lists generally looking very differently and going very Raven Wing heavy. For this one though, I thought I'd talk through the things that have just generally done well, the units that appear the most frequently, and what sort of lists they tend to appear in, and what makes them strong enough to be very common includes for the Dark Angels right now. First up, for a few honourable mentions, these ones were just a little bit outside of the top 10. There were 10 units that got 6 or more selections in these lists, and these all got 5 or fewer, but really weren't so far behind and certainly see competitive play. For more general Space Marine units, there was the Gladiator Lancer with 5 selections, Solid Space Marine Anti-Tank that doesn't need much support. Infiltrators got 5 for their good deep strike denial, and ability to actually infiltrate if that makes more sense than denying reserves. Assault Intercessors got 5, often 5 to run with Azrael specifically, as often the done thing to have him loiter around with those and then have them push up to the mid-board after his farm command points for a few turns for a late game punch. And then beyond that, for the actual Dark Angels unique choices, 3 Raven Wing choices feature here, the Raven Wing Command Squad, the Black Knights and Samael. The Command Squad are 120 points, giving you a lot of interesting value to an Outrider or Black Knight unit, some okay melee with a champion, extra OC and reviving models. The Outriders can give them +1 damage, and the Black Knights are a fairly hard-hitting plasma and melee unit. They were certainly absolutely omnipresent and usually spammed in the Company of Hunters lists. They made a couple of appearances elsewhere. It was kind of similar for the Black Knights, who got 4 selections, 90 points for 3 fast-moving bikers with plasma weapons and some devastating wound melee. And Samael had a few people playing with him as well. He got some interesting changes in the Christmas balance data slate, and could be interesting enough paired with Outriders, where he can quite like their +1 damage rule, so he can hit with a bunch of punchy damage 3 attacks on the charge with them. The Black Knights and the Command Squad certainly seem to be auto-includes if you're playing Company of Hunters. They're a fairly niche choice elsewhere, though some lists do choose to pick them up. Moving on to the top 10 proper though, and first up we have the Lieutenant with Combi Weapon. He was present in 6 out of the 15 army lists I looked at, and the Space Marine Lone Operative is just a really popular choice for Marine lists in general. Cheap Lone Operatives tend to be handy to have. They can screen out an area of the board when you know that the opponent just can't interact with them at all outside of 12 inches, so that makes them very reliable for that. They can be good units to do secondaries or occasionally cause annoying disruption, and the Combi Weapon Lieutenant tends to be extra annoying to get rid of due to his special rules, being able to reactive move away from the enemy. So often if they do move within 12 inches, they're going to move within 9 inches, trigger that rule, and then he can just move to the other side of a ruin or back away from melee or something. Even when he can be directly attacked, he's at least somewhat annoying to kill with a 5+ feel no pain and stealth. He won't do much damage, but could amp up a bit of damage from the rest of the army, giving you reroll 1s to wound against one mid-board objective. It's really good for the utility role, maybe tending to be a little bit more commonly played at sort of more top-end competitive lists as opposed to more casually in my experience, given that he's not really a damage threat to anything besides light infantry. In the Dark Angels, potentially he could help out Lionel Johnson, as he's a lone operative that can trigger his lone operative rule without having to rely on other infantry that might get shot down. Before we move on to the other top choices, I'll just give a quick shout out to Baron of Dice, the sponsor of today's video, and they're a high quality dice maker based in the USA. They made some fun fancy merch dice for the channel with the Auspex Tactics logo on, and reached out to ask if they could sponsor some videos at the time. Their offerings are a whole bunch of different dice designs, many of which are themed so they could fit in with various different wargaming factions out there in the world. Some of them could be appropriate enough for 40k. There's a few that could be relevant for Forces of the Unforgiven, like these Angels of Death or Grim Reaper ones potentially. There's loads of other stuff though. Their typical offerings are 25 dice, I believe for around about £29 or $32. If you do wind up picking up any of them, then there's the code Auspex for 5% off. They also have some nice Auspex Tactics channel dice as well. I'll leave them specifically linked below as well. Like the rest of them, they do feel very high quality and roll well. In any case, feel free to check them out, links down in the video description if you'd like to have a look over their range. They do have loads of fun stuff, and of course a massive thank you to them for sponsoring the video. Back to the other most played units though, and the Invader ATV makes an appearance here. Interesting to see the Primaris Mario Kart in such good representation. I guess for most Space Marine armies it's a pretty interesting, cheap expendable trading style unit, and then has a bit of overemphasis in Dark Angels, due to them commonly playing Stormlands and Company of Hunters, both of which have a slight mounted keyword focus, particularly the Company of Hunters with its shooting things as well. The Invader's only 60 points for 1, has 8 wounds with toughness 5, which is pretty adequate durability for that, particularly given that it can move quite fast and can chip in with a little bit of damage with a twin bolt rifle and either an onslaught Gatling cannon, though the multi-melter tends to be the more commonly taken thing. They're often fielded in multiples and can just be used to zoom up to put an expendable unit in the midboard to do secondaries and things. If they happen to cause any disruption or actual damage to the enemy army, then so much the better. And if there's a bunch of mounted units around, every so often they might actually get to shoot out of sequence with their special rule. Company of Hunters lists often seem to be taking 3 of them, but otherwise armies that took them maybe took 1 or 2. Next up, we've also got the standard Primaris Intercessor squad. They're present in 6 out of the 15 army lists, 80 points for 5 of them or 160 per 10. These are your standard issue Space Marines, getting OC2 and their objective secured special rule, which means they have sticky objectives if they hold a point for a turn. Can punch up a little bit with a grenade launcher and a power fist in the unit, but in particular just get absolutely massive shooting damage against light infantry with their bolt rifles, with target elimination adding 2 to their attacks characteristic, so 4 punchy bolt shots per guy with helpful keywords to absolutely annihilate 1 wound infantry hordes. Space Marines generally tend to be at least okay at taking out lighter infantry anyway, so aren't usually something that you need to spam, but can be really nice just for 1 unit of 5, that way you get the special rule and a bit of specific anti-horde capability, and don't go too heavy on them. In Dark Angels specifically, they seem to have taken over as a solid rival for Assault Intercessors, which tended to be the fashion with Azrael. Unlike the Assault Intercessors, they won't be giving him melee rerolls in close combat, but their sticky objectives rule works quite well with him as well. Again, they could be used to hide out of line of sight on a home objective for the first few turns, and then if it looks like the opponent isn't going to be able to threaten your home objective, you can then move them forward guilt-free with Azrael to fight for the midboard in the last few turns, and his sustained hits can make their shooting attack extra nasty as well. Next up, we've got the Primarch himself, Lionel Johnson at 315 points, who was also present in 6 out of the 15 army list sampled. Basically, the Lion seems to be in a pretty well balanced spot at the moment, a powerful option that can be really hard to deal with for certain armies, that absolutely can be worth taking in competitive, but isn't so good that he's just an auto-include that you have to take every time. He's fairly hard to take down. He's got lone operative if he's nearby infantry units, which as mentioned could be a Combi Lieutenant, or just something like some sturdy Deathwing Knights. And then even if he can target him, he's got his big Primarch style stat line with a 3+ invulnerable save for the Emperor's Shield, and in melee it's going to be even trickier, given that he can fight first and hit you with a whole bunch of melee damage before you get to strike. His melee damage is seriously nasty, fealty with a bunch of strength 12 damage 4 attacks, and his damage 2 sweep profile absolutely goes through Space Marines. I say his buffing special rules maybe aren't the single most interesting thing, but it's likely that one of the 3 of them could at least be somewhat useful most of the time. Overall seems like he's in a fairly good spot, in particular that fights first with the massive melee damage makes him a real problem unit to fight for enemy melee forces, and he could be good for heroic intervention, and he's certainly solid enough in Gladius or Stormlands. He really likes the advance and charge in either of those, and reactive move or the lance stratagem in Gladius could be handy enough as well. Next up, and I guess in 5th place, we have the Jump Intercessors. Lots of Dark Angels making like Blood Angels here, for basically the Primaris Assault Squad, 90 points per unit of 5 of them, and these were present in 7 out of the 15 army lists, so around about half. They're standard issue Space Marine stat lines, with mass damage 1 attacks from Astartes chainswords. They have a power fist in the unit and a couple of plasma pistols. They move fast and can deep strike, so can be really good for doing secondary objectives. and their special rule helps them punch up against tougher things a bit with their mortal wound impact hits, potentially getting 2 or 3 mortal wounds overall when they charge in if they can all make it into engagement. For Space Marines in general, again, they're a pretty handy action doer and skirmisher type unit, really not too uncommon to see in competitive army lists, but I think they may be overemphasized in Dark Angels a little bit due to a lot of lists liking Stormlance in particular. The advance and charge and everything there makes them just that bit more interesting with a really big threat range, and they're definitely not too bad in Gladius as well. Also having the advance and charge option there, and a few bits of stratagem support. Generally they tend to get taken in small units and squads of 5 for the secondary sort of role. As a solid rival or counterpart to them though, the Outriders are also unusually popular in Dark Angels, 80 points per 3 of them or 160 per 6, and for plenty of armies they feel like they're filling a similar sort of role as the small sort of skirmish unit, secondary doer, and bullying light infantry sort of force, and also both having good reasons to run them in Dark Angels between synergies with the detachments they use, and also just theme-wise with Ravenwing. Outriders move fast at 12 inches, are nice and sturdy with 4 wounds each at toughness 5, which really isn't too bad at all for a fast moving 80 point unit, and then generally deal with lighter infantry quite well between twin bolters, and then a bunch of attacks in melee, all of which go up to strength 5 and damage 2 if they get the charge, so at least they can pose a pretty nasty threat to standard sized Space Marine style units now. In lists like Gladius and Stormlance, they're kind of fine just as small disruption units of 3, maybe in a similar sort of style to Invader ATVs, moving out to the mid-board objectives and being fairly sacrificial but having to take at least a fair bit of damage before they'll actually go down. But Stormlance and Company of Hunters could incentivize you to take multiple squads or bigger units of them, and maybe make use of some of the Ravenwing leaders, either the Command Squad or Samael. They've got good stratagems that can be used on them, and both the Ravenwing Command Squad and Samael enjoy the +1 damage combo for the Outriders on the charge, and that makes their damage 2 weapons go to damage 3 and are far more punchy. Overall, basically a maybe skirmisher choice for a bunch of army lists, though can be kind of central in those 2 detachments if you want to build around them. Into the top 4 most commonly played units though, and next up we have the Inner Circle Companions, 90 points for the Rogue Dark Angels veterans that totally aren't fallen. 3 to 6 in a unit, and you get 3 wounds each, and then a strong general purpose melee attack. They can hit hard with a bunch of good AP damage 2 attacks with lethal hits, or swap out to an anti-horde mode if that makes more sense. They're maybe not crazy durable, even if they are 3 wounds and -1 to hit if they're led by a character, but they can be a fairly massive and scary damage punch unit, often led by Azrael, though sometimes perhaps a Judiceer for fight first, or a Librarian for the 4+ invulnerable save for fairly cheap. All of those can be fairly viable. I have seen people use them in impulsors before, though maybe not quite so much out of the list that are looked at here. I guess in particular if Azrael's joining them, then he'd want to be not in a transport ideally, as otherwise he's not generating command points. Generally they maybe don't seem to be spammed quite as much as say Deathwing Knights, often just 1 big unit in a list, maybe 2. They do seem like a great target for stratagems though, advance and charge is quite nice, and they could be a really good heroic intervention threat if they had a Judiceer about as well for the fights first. Getting seriously more popular now, and in 3rd place we have the Deathwing Knights, 250 points for some big enormous sturdy Terminators. They're generally seen as a very intimidating prospect to take down, a very chunky 4 wounds at toughness 5 with the 2+ save and the 4+ invulnerable save, and their Inner Circle means they're -1 damage as well, so damage 2 weapons are incredibly ineffective against them, and damage 3 weapons still will take 2 hits to down 1 due to them being 4 wounds. They even have their Watcher in the Dark for a feel no pain against mortal wounds if they happen to get attacked by that, which is pretty great as one of the easier ways to deal some big damage to them. Then for their melee, it's really scary in general purpose, with the maces and the great weapon with the devastating wounds being the most commonly played ones. That'll be stacking a whole bunch of AP2 attacks with damage 2 on just about anything, a few punching through invulnerable saves. I have seen some people use power weapons. In general, the squads tend to run without leaders. Occasionally for the power weapon ones, I've seen people using Terminator chaplains from time to time. And they're really quite common staples in Gladius Task Force and Stormlance, both of them being able to access advance and charge in that, which may be one of the most important things to actually get all that scary melee up the board fast and into the combat. There's 2 squads and a whole bunch of lists. They're not uncommon to spam out a full 3 of them. Overall scary stuff. Looks like the Elite of the Unforgiven are still seeing some good play on the board, and certainly far more so than regular Terminator variants, which just don't seem to be well balanced against them. Neither regular Terminator squads, nor Assault squads, nor regular Deathwing Terminators get a look in against these guys. For 2nd place for most commonly played units, it's another generic choice with the standard Scout Squad. These guys are really commonly played in most Space Marine lists if they can get taken, usually in cheap and effective units of 5. They're nice and cheap and expendable, can start in the mid-board, and have adequate damage and defense stats for that cheap cost, but mainly are there to threaten to do early game secondaries, maybe survive on mid-board primaries, or force the opponent to move out to try and deal with them or contest the objective if they want it. then have further big advantages. They get the scout move, which means they could potentially go aggressive and go for first turn move blocks or even charges and things if they want to. And they get their return to reserve special rule, which could be handy late game, maybe jumping around the board to threaten to do secondary objectives late on. Their exact war gear, basically most of their things are really quite viable. Generally people take one of their heavy weapons, maybe more commonly a missile launcher, but the heavy bolter's also fine. Usually the sergeant would want an Astartes chainsword for a bunch of hard-hitting attacks, but otherwise I have seen people using combat knives now they have extra AP, taking or leaving the sniper or the ranged weapons. Generally their exact loadout isn't really the most important thing though. They can just do at least some damage to sort of light infantry equivalents, but aren't really going to be a damage dealer unit. It's more important that they're just there as bodies on the line, with at least a little bit of threat of one sort or another. I feel like most army lists tend to go for either 1 or 2 units of them. Infiltration units having a little bit of diminishing returns. Finally, last but not least, and kind of thoroughly auto-include for the Dark Angels, is Supreme Grandmaster Azrael. 115 points for the Chapter Master of the Dark Angels, and he was taken by 14 out of the 15 army lists that I saw. Just one company of Hunters list deciding to pass him over to go rather full on Raven Wing. Seems that Azrael still arguably the Dark Angel's best datasheet, just having great value for his points cost. The 1 command point generated per turn is a really big staple that a lot of armies don't want to do without, but otherwise offers some great advantages for his squad. Sustained hits 1 makes their damage output scarier, and getting the Lion Helm for a 4+ invulnerable save is nice for any 3+ save units, in Circle Companions particularly maybe, and even has the Watcher in the Dark mortal wound protection. On top of that, his damage output genuinely isn't bad either. The Lion's Wrath is a punchy combi weapon, and the Sword of Secrets has a bunch of devastating wound melee attacks, perhaps being extra nice on Assault Intercessors where you might be able to get full wound rerolls if the squad winds up fighting for mid-board objectives at the end of the game. Typically the way to use him tends to be not in the transport so you don't interfere with his command point generation, and have him hide out of line of sight with a guard unit of your choice for the first few turns of the game, then step up to the mid-board objectives as a sort of late game wave with a bunch of OC to try and take those points for the Lion, and put his good damage and defense profile to work with a buffed unit alongside. It does seem that people do use him in different ways. Assault Intercessors are nice enough. Regular Intercessors are pretty solid now they have their boosted damage, and their sticky objective rule is handy so you can just fully abandon a homeboard objective if it makes sense. Inner Circle Companions perhaps make the best use of his buffs. They can work with pretty much literally whatever, including things like Hellblasters. Let me know your thoughts as to current Dark Angels units in Warhammer 40k. Which ones would you rate or not? Let me know down in the comments below. As mentioned, a big thank you to Baron of Dice for sponsoring this one. If you want to get some fancy faction dice for Warhammer 40k or other things, then feel free to check them out, links down in the video description. They've got on-theme ones for a whole bunch of factions out there throughout wargaming, and if you do wind up picking up anything from them, there's that code Auspex for 5% off any order through them. There'll be links down in the video description. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming, with new ones out just about every day. If you've been enjoying the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can also find that linked in the video description if you'd like to support the channel. There's a few rewards, including seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next, and automatic entry into the prize giveaways. A massive thank you to anyone supporting there, and a huge thank you to anyone listening in general. I'll hope to see you guys next time.